morning, everybody. My name is Josie and this is Everett, and we are both SNAP-Ed nutrition educators from the Erie County, New York team. So it's March, it's National Nutrition Month, and for this year's theme, we are doing breakfast. So to kick off National Nutrition Month, we are going to show you how to make SNAP-Ed New York's recipe, Fantastic French Toast. This is a really yummy, easy, tasty, and affordable recipe to try if you're craving something a little sweeter for breakfast.
Great. So I'm going to get it started by talking a little bit about the equipment we're going to use for today's recipe. First and foremost, we want to have a pan. We use these nice heated electric skillets in a lot of our classes, but if you have a nice big frying pan, that's a great thing to use. I would recommend using non-stick so you don't have to use too much butter to keep it from sticking. This type of recipe does have a tendency to stick to not non-stick pans. So next thing we want is a rubber spatula, or plastic is fine, but something like this is great because when you're using non-stick, you don't want to scratch it up with something that's made out of metal. The next thing we're going to use is a spatula. If you just wanted to use a fork, you could totally do that. I actually don't own a spatula, so that's kind of funny. Over here we have a nice big container. If you want, I know some people like to use a pie pan or something that's got a nice wide area because that's going to be what we dip our bread in at some point. The last couple of things I'm going to mention, liquid measuring cup. This will be used to measure the half a cup of milk we're going to use in our recipe, and then measuring spoons too. And I know some people like to just kind of wing it when they measure stuff, and that's totally fine for a recipe like this. Try to eyeball a half a cup. Finally, gloves. You'll notice that Josie and I will be wearing gloves when we make this recipe. Most people don't cook with gloves when they're cooking at home, and that's fine. But part of the reason why we like to wear gloves today is because we're going to be handling raw egg. And whenever you work with raw egg, you really want to make sure that you wash your hands after so you don't end up getting anyone sick with foodborne illness. So I'll have Josie talk about some of these beautiful ingredients we're going to be using today.
Thanks, Everett. So to put a healthier twist on French toast for today's recipe, we're going to be using a whole grain bread. So for today's recipe, I really wanted to try finding a bread without any added sugars, so I chose this whole grain sourdough. Now you can find some other breads in the normal packaged bread section that don't have any added sugars. However, they were out of stock of those today, so I chose this Fresh Bakery sourdough. Sourdoughs can be a little bit on the pricier side, but if you've never given them a try, I really recommend it. They're really tasty, and they're great for these types of recipe because they'll hold up in the batter well. So you might be wondering, what is a whole grain? Bread is made from the seed kernels of wheat. This is what a wheat kernel looks like. If you think of a wheat kernel like an egg, the outer part, which looks like the shell, or what's called the bran, is where most of the seed's fiber is. Fiber is really important for our bodies because it helps give us that full and satisfied feeling for longer, and it's also really important for our digestive system. What looks like the yolk of the seed, or what's called the germ, is where the plant sprouts from. So this is where most of the kernel's nutrients are, like magnesium and potassium, that are really important for our body. What looks like the middle of the egg or the seed or the egg white is called the endosperm. This is the bulk of the seed. However, it's not very rich in any nutrients, and this is actually what refined grains are made out of. So if you think of things like white bread or white rice, they only are made from the endosperm of the wheat kernel. So that's why at SNAP-Ed we like to say, try to make half of your grains whole so you can get all of the benefits from the wheat or from the grain kernels. So to get started, we're going to start with making our batter. So if Everett, you'd like to pour half a cup of low-fat milk.
Actually, I'll do the eggs first.
We're gonna use 2 eggs for today's.
All right. I'm going to start by whisking up the eggs, just because it gets easier to get it started. Now I'm going to add the milk. All right. You want to add some cinnamon?
Yeah, so this recipe calls for a teaspoon of cinnamon. We're gonna do a teaspoon of vanilla.
Half a teaspoon, I think.
Oh, half a teaspoon of vanilla. And I also like to put a little dash of nutmeg in my French toast as well. So we're just gonna do a little sprinkle.
So, fun thing about things like vanilla, which is actually a spice, cinnamon, nutmeg, these things add a lot of flavor without adding a lot of added sugar or added sodium. So that's a nice way to bump up the flavor of this recipe. At this point, I'm going to start heating up my pan, which I kind of started a little bit there, and I'm going to add some butter. This is going to give us some nice flavor, and it's going to help it cook. I'm going to stir that around, turn the heat up, and then fun thing about French toast is in France they call it pain perdu, which means found bread. And so in the case of what that means is it's really good to use with stale bread. So let's say you used half of this loaf for sandwiches or something, and then the other half kind of got a little bit on the dry side. It started to get a little stale. This is a great recipe to use that bread and not have to throw it in the garbage, which is a great way to save some money too. All right, so our butter's heated up. At this point, what I'm doing is I'm bringing the temperature up. When it comes to what you cook with at home, it really depends. So let's say you're working with a pan that's, your burner, let's say, gets too really hot really fast or something like that. So it really depends. Relatively speaking, we want to think about 4 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and add this piece of bread into the pan. And you hear that sizzle, that's a great sign.
Yep, and really you're just dipping the bread in the batter, flipping it over to dip it again. And that's what Everett was saying in the beginning. We want something wide that the bread will fit in to dip it.
There we go. All right, now we're really sizzling. That's starting to smell really nice. All right. So, while this is coming along, do you want to talk about toppings?
Yeah, I'm just changing my gloves because I got some raw egg on them. But yeah, so for today's topping, I chose to use bananas. However, you can use any fresh or canned fruit that you like. Just be sure when you're picking out canned fruits to look for the canned in water or canned in 100% fruit juice options. Because when canned fruit is canned in syrup, it just means extra sugar. So if you're trying to watch your sugar, you'll want to avoid those. So I'm just gonna slice our banana up into small circles. So it'll be ready to go for our French toast. And then we are using a bit of syrup today too. I chose this light syrup option, which has less sugar than original syrup, but there's also usually sugar-free syrup options at the grocery store too if you'd prefer.
Good. So at this point, I'm gonna flip our French toast. It's already starting to look really nice. It's starting to smell really nice. One thing that we want to think about with heat with a recipe like this is we don't want it to be too hot. So we don't want this pan to be ripping hot when you add the French toast to the pan, because that could cause it to burn. We want kind of like a gentle medium heat. It does take a little while, but a nice thing about this recipe is that if you wanted to, let's say you have a busy morning, you can make this and even freeze it and toast it up and have it as a ready to go breakfast option. And so that is something we can do. And yeah, other things we could top this with. Applesauce is maybe a recommendation, or other fresh fruit like Josie said. But really whatever you like.
Yeah, you could use honey instead of syrup. You could use some cocoa powder on top. There's really endless options for how you can customize your fantastic French toast.
Yep. And so, what do you think? Should I pull it?
Yeah, you'll just want to wait until the sides of your French toast are starting to look golden brown, and looks like they are.
Yep.
So I would say that it's ready.
All right. Let me try not to drop this here. All right. And let me show you what it looks like. Really nice.
Beautiful.
There you go.
All right, I'm going to top it with some bananas. And a little bit of syrup.
All right.
And there you have it. That's our oh. Make sure to take the seal off your syrup. Sorry, everybody. Okay. And there you have it, your fantastic French toast. Make sure to check out more of our breakfast recipes on snapedny.org and stay tuned for next week's recipe for National Nutrition Month.
Take care, everybody.